So who or what is to blame for the growing number of massive deadly fires ripping through California? Can we figure out some answers? Well, let's bring in the Director of Strategic Engagement at the Natural Resources Defense Council, Bob Deans, and Pacific Legal Foundation attorney Jonathan Wood. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Okay, so the AP doing some fact checking on this says this: nature provides the dangerous winds that have whipped the fires, and human-caused climate change over the long haul is killing and drying the shrubs and trees that provide the fuel. That's not to say California is blameless. Urban development encroaching on wildlands also is a factor. Jonathan.
Well, obviously the dry conditions are a big factor, and this recurring droughts are making it worse. But you can't ignore the effect that state and local and federal regulations are having. Much of these forests are federally owned. They haven't been managed well for decades, and the fires are getting worse. In the late 80s and early 90s, an average of 2.9 million acres in the U.S. burned. In the 90s and 2000s, that doubled to over 6 million acres, and in 2015, we set a record with 10 million acres. The problem is getting worse, and solving it's going to require more active management, more people working together. I think one of the things that stood out in Trump's comments when he visited the fires was he emphasized that we have to reach out and that environmentalists have to work with regulators, with forest managers, and with the federal government, that if this is about a fight and about assigning blame, we're not going to have fewer fires next year. We're just going to have more fights.
Okay, Wall Street Journal, the editorial board, wrote a piece called California's Paradise Lost, and in talking about what the overall U.S. Forest Service mission is and that it's been hampered, they said this: once upon a time, the U.S. Forest Service mission was to actively manage the federal government's resources, yet numerous laws over the last 50 years, including the Endangered Species Act and National Environmental Policy Act, have hampered tree clearing, controlled burns, and timber sales on federal land. And Bob, even the state has said those things need to be happening. California has been saying that.
Well, certainly, Shannon, it's not common sense environmental safeguards that are causing these fires. It's not common sense environmental safeguards that have killed 130 million trees in California. It's heat and drought, like Jonathan said, and these bark beetles, all of which is made worse by climate change. But of course, we need to manage our forest. The question is how, and what do we mean by manage? And for us, it means three things, Shannon. First, listening to the scientists, the professional firefighters on the ground, and the local communities. Every fire tells a story. We need to use that knowledge wisely. Number two, putting the health of our forests first. And number three, taking real action to fight the dangerous climate change that is making these fires worse.
Okay. Also from the piece in the Wall Street Journal, they said this: California's own legislative analyst's office recommended that California prune its regulations, facilitate timber sales, and ease permitting for burning biomass, because they talked about the fact that people who even have dead wood and things they need to get rid of, there's such a huge regulatory process to even be able to do those burns. They say environmentalists oppose this, but one irony is that destruction from fires imperils species far more than does regulated tree clearing. Bob.
Well, that's why it's so important that we take a look at these things locally, look at the specific forest system, look at the climate in that region, because it varies region to region. But what we cannot do, we cannot afford to do, Shannon, is to use these wildfires as a cover for unsustainable practices that put our forest resources at risk, actually make these wildfires worse. The stakes are just too high for that.
All right, Jonathan, so how do we find some common ground? Is there a common ground to be found when it comes to issues of clearing things away, being able to burn off dead wood, taking steps that even the state agrees are things that it would like to see happen? And it's a pretty environmentally conscious state.
I think absolutely, and the fact that the state has been more interested in engaging and clearing its own forest is a sign that that's an opportunity. And I think it takes more free market solutions, more ideas from the environmentalists. The main challenge right now is that the source of the fire threat comes from the undergrowth, the brush, the younger trees. They're also not commercially profitable, so it's hard to get timber harvesters to solve that problem without cutting the larger trees that concern environmentalists when they're cut down. So I think the challenge is, how do we deal with the problem, remove that undergrowth in a profitable way while protecting environmental values that you and I care about, that California cares about, and I'm sure, Shannon, you care about? That's an economic problem, it's an environmental problem, and it's a political problem. And if we're not all working together, we're not going to solve it.
Well, I know one of the things the Trump administration is doing, saying that they're going to expedite the sale of timber on federal lands that will lead to more clearing. So we'll see if that's something that does help long term. This is not a problem that surfaced overnight, and I know it will take a long time to figure out solutions too, but hopefully the sooner the better for the folks of California and all across the West and other places dealing with these fires. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
It's a good conversation to have.